In this video, we'll examine Sartre's analysis of the past as a mode of temporality, and we'll begin by contextualizing the problems Sartre is trying to address, situating his argument in light of the ways the past has been conceptualized by others. We'll then take up Sartre's argument for the past being a relation, in the sense of having a past, but also how the language of possession is itself problematic. Finally, we'll explore more precisely the nature of the past in terms of a relation between the for itself and the in itself, wherein we'll discover a synthesis expressed through the past tense of the verb to be and in the notion of becoming. So, how do we think about the past? One common sense approach is that it is a point in time no longer here, a now that has now passed by us. For many imbued by the scientific worldview, the past is defined as a measurement of time, no different than the present in terms of measurement, other than its location on a timeline. Of course, contemporary physics has offered us different conceptions of time that defy the traditional scientific paradigm, but I doubt these notions have sunk into common consciousness quite yet. More readily accepted, perhaps, is the notion of time derived from neuroscience. Here we find the past to be a collection of stored mental representations and memories organized into a sequence, whose previous sensory impressions can be recalled by the brain in an attenuated form. Like contemporary physics, recent developments in neuroscience complicates this picture greatly, but we are once again only interested in how these ideas seep into everyday consciousness. And so speaking of that consciousness, some popular appropriations of so-called Eastern mysticism by Western societies demonstrates a bit of a more ontological approach. All that exists is now, the power of now. The past and future are merely thoughts and have no independent reality in themselves. Practices like mindfulness meditation aim to focus the mind on the only thing that is real, the now. The past and future, attached to regret and worry, for example, distracts us from what is most important. And of course, a long philosophical heritage addresses the nature of time. Yet examples such as Descartes, Bergson, and Husserl, three figures Sartre addresses here, all fall short of a robust approach to temporality and are guilty of promoting a more sophisticated version of the same reductionistic approaches already mentioned. Sartre critiques these approaches because they treat the past in a way that is either completely disconnected from the present or, at the other extreme, as merely a modification of the present. Like the relationship between the in itself and the for itself, Sartre brings the past and the present into a dialectical relation that resists any simple reductionism. The past is both me and not me. It is a modification of my present, but my present is always what exceeds the past. For Sartre, the past is neither non-existent nor something present, but rather is defined in its relation to the present and future. That relation is always first and foremost personal, individual, and connected to one's being. The past never exists in isolation or as the past in general, but is always most fundamentally marked by a certain relation to me in the present. Sartre writes, "My past never appears isolated in its pastness. It would be absurd even to imagine that it can exist as such. It is originally the past of this present." Although, in thinking in terms of relations, it may seem more appropriate to speak of the past as something one has, connoting a kind of relationship to it, we have to be cautious as to how we understand the idea of having. We cannot possess the past like we can an object. Such a mode of possession entails an external relation. So I have this pen here, and which I did not have at one point, and at some point in the future, I will not have again. Instead, the past implies a passive possession. I don't actively choose to have a past like I do an object, but find myself always already having a past as a necessary feature of my present being. Thus, Sartre suggests that instead of saying I have a past, it's perhaps more accurate to say I am my own past. In light of this conceptualization of the past as a relation, it follows that the past only enters the world through a for itself, and thus is a feature of human reality. The past exists for us because we are intrinsically connected to it without being fully identified with it. Beyond being a relation, what exactly is the past? It is identified with the in itself, but more precisely, the past is a for itself that has been overtaken or overwhelmed by the in itself. The past is the source of my traits and essence. It is what I am without being able to live it. It is also my facticity in being unavoidable and which haunts me by its original contingency, influencing my present motivations and actions. As such, facticity and past are two words to indicate one and the same thing. At the same time, there is an ever-present tension between being and not being one's past. The past is the in itself which I am always surpassing in my present. The present is the for itself, wherein I take distance from my past while being positioned to assume it as me. And while the past itself is definite and determined, the way I assume it is not. The meaning of my past is fluid. This doesn't mean I can change the past, as this would be to live in bad faith, since to think I changed it would merely deny what has happened. But I take responsibility for my past and assume my possibilities in negating it. So let's now take up a variation of Sartre's own example to illustrate the concept of the past he's presenting here. At one point, I was a student, but who is it that is this was? What me is it, if indeed it is me? We say of that person back then that it is me. What is the thing that unites this me who is and this me who was? It's only at the extreme limit of who is now this me that I was the student. In other words, my past self depends on my present self. I am my past self in the mode of having been it. This having been is the way I undergo a lived experience of the past. And we can see how this dialectical relationship between past and present is communicated through the past tense of the singular form of the verb to be, was. Grammatically, the verb was connects the subject of a sentence to the subject complement. I was happy. I was a child. According to Sartre, the verb was marks a unique synthesis of present and past. It characterizes the type of being of the for itself in relation to the past, a relation marked by a present responsibility for it while also being deeply affected by it. To take another example, let me say that I was fatigued. According to Sartre, I am responsible for this having had this fatigue because it is I in my present that is sustaining this state of my past being. If this is not the case, such fatigue would be lost, no longer being what it was. The present being is the foundation of its own past, and it is the present's character as a foundation which the was manifests. The present is the past when mediated by the term was, which is neither fully past nor present, but an original synthesis of these two temporal modes. This synthesis in terms of was emphasizes that it is not appropriate to say I have a past, but the past connotes a sense of being one's past in the present. For this reason, Sartre suggests that the Cartesian cogito should better be formulated as I think, therefore I was. However, what if I'm dead? In that case, there is no longer present the one who makes this past self exist. Only someone else can ever say, Brian was ... and not Brian is, or I am in the sense of me as an individual who can no longer speak. In this case, we are not dealing with my past, but your past as you remember who I was. I am no longer a for itself for others, but at death reduced to simply a for others. It is you alone, in your freedom, who is responsible for the being of the dead individual whom you are speaking of. It's only at this point of death wherein I become solely my past, which finalizes my identity based solely on my past actions. At the moment of death, we are defenseless before the judgments of others. They can decide in truth who we are. But so long as I am not dead, I'm not consumed by this in itself. And yet, While alive, my past presents itself as what I have to be, but not yet am. The have to here being in the sense that death is inevitable, and as such, I am destined to become my past fully and without reserve, when all possibility for me as a for itself has been exhausted. In conclusion, so long as I am alive, I am not my past, but have a complex relationship to it at the same time. There is an ever present tension of being and not being one's past, which is captured by the notion of becoming. Becoming connotes a synthesis of being and non being. So long as I live, I am always this becoming, which remains tethered to being and thus to the past. At the same time, I'm always in the process of exceeding what is toward what is not yet. This relation between being and non being is a relation internal to being itself, emerging out of being in its act of self annihilation that gives rise to its own nothingness of being. Being thus begins with what I am, and being what I am so as to not be it. At the same time, the only way I can be my past is in not being it, for only a for itself can have, or rather be, its own past. Heraclitus is famously known for saying, "I cannot step in the same river twice," suggesting in this context that I am never what I say I am. However, Sartre corrects this idea by adding to it that I have always stepped in the river so that I did not step in it twice. In other words, I have to be what I am in order not to be it. And for us to understand Sartre, we have to constantly keep in mind this dialectical mode of thinking that he is frequently deploying. Otherwise, it's very easy to oversimplify Sartre and get a description of what he thinks that is overly one-sided. At the end of the section on the past, Sartre leaves us with a question. How does a for itself, which was its past, become the past which a new for itself has to be? In other words, how does the for itself as a concrete event become past? And this will lead us to a consideration of the present as another mode of temporality, which we will be addressing in the following video. So if you got something from this video and you want to support the work, like it, share the video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you want to support it even more, there's the super thanks button below this video. And if you want to be a more ongoing supporter, you can do so on Patreon, where I offer things like video transcripts, unedited materials, and prioritize questions and comments here on YouTube. The link is below. I want to give a big thanks to these individuals who have been supporting this channel over on Patreon. As always, thank you for watching. And until next time, be well.